Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And with us tonight on our panel, the Conservative Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Labour's Emily Thornberry, for the Liberal Democrats, Alistair Carmichael, former Scottish Secretary in the coalition government, the television presenter and celebrity apprentice friend of Donald Trump, Piers Morgan, and the novelist, author of, among other books, We Need to Talk About Kevin, Lionel Shriver. And if you get irritated by what you hear, you want to take issue with what you hear at home, remember you can join the debate either on Facebook or on Twitter, or you can text us on 83981. We had the Prime Minister's speech 2 days ago about Brexit. We've had a first reaction from Europe, and that leads us to our first question, which comes from Lynn Walker, please. Lynn Walker.
If the referendum was rerun tomorrow, what do you think the outcome would be?
Alistair Carmichael.
Well, we didn't make a particularly good job of predicting the outcome last time, so forgive me if we don't predict it this time. But, well, first of all, it's not going to be run again tomorrow. But I think there is an issue here, and it is that of those people who voted to leave or to remain, there was a great deal, or a great lack of clarity about what was on offer. I think on Tuesday this week, it suddenly became a great deal clearer what was on offer. Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, quite remarkably, say that it's not a hard Brexit. Well, I'll tell you, if leaving the single market, leaving the customs union is not a hard Brexit, if walking away from all that without a deal is not a hard Brexit, then I don't really know what does.
So the question is to you, you're not asked to be an expert,
right.
But do you think in the light of what's happened since, people will be thinking again?
What I think needs to happen now, if we are to bring back the 52 and the 48 together and bring a degree of unity back to our country, is that once we know actually what the shape of that deal with the European Union, an enormously important trading market for us, is going to be, at that point, this being a process that started with the will of the people in a referendum should be concluded with the will of the people in a referendum, once we know what it's going to be.
Okay. Piers Morgan.
Well, I voted Remain, cards on the table, so I'm not particularly happy that we are where we are, but we are where we are. And the whole point of democracy in a free society like ours is that when you go and vote, it really matters. It's incredibly important how you vote in elections and referendums. You know, in the point about a second referendum, well, this was the second referendum. We had the first one back in the mid-70s. We voted to go into Europe. We've now had another one to leave Europe. I don't agree with it, but we are where we are. So actually, the answer to your question should be, don't ask the question. We're not going to have another referendum. And I say that with great respect to the questioner. But I have so many people I know, it's a bit like with Trump in America, I'm sure we'll come to that, this kind of gnashing and wailing and weeping and demands to have another election in America, another referendum here, because we didn't get the result we wanted, is frankly pathetic. We've all got to grow up.
Lynn Walker, you asked the question. Is that your view that we should grow up, or that people would vote differently?
I voted Remain. I'm not so much asking for a second referendum, more thinking that I think a lot of people voted on one issue. And if they actually looked now at the whole picture and what they've been told since, I think some people might have voted differently.
What one issue?
Immigration.
Because according to the Prime Minister, that wasn't one issue. There were loads of issues when she spoke on Tuesday. She said all sorts of people voted for a different kind of Britain, people voted for this, that and the other.
In this area, I would say that was probably the major issue.
Mainly immigration?
Yeah.
What do you think, Chris Grayling?
I actually think it wasn't purely about immigration itself. I think the issue was about the ability to take our own decisions. I went all around the country campaigning for Brexit. I was one of those who believed we should leave. And overwhelmingly, the response I got from people is we just want to be able to take our own decisions. Now, immigration was a big area where that was the case. There is a broad sense in this country that we've had immigration levels that are too high. People want to be able to manage the number of people who come to this country in the future. Not necessarily to become a closed-door nation, that's not what we're about, but to have some degree of control, to be able to limit, to be able to set limits on the number of people who come and live and work here. But it wasn't actually just about the immigration issue, it was about the ability to take our own decisions. And if you're in my position as an elected representative standing on your doorstep saying, please vote for my party, and you say, I don't think immigration is under control, I want to reduce it, what are you going to do about it? If my response is, I have no power to restrict it, because as part of the European Union we have to accept full freedom of movement, then inevitably you're going to turn to me and say, well, that's not good enough. I want you as my elected representative to do what I want. And actually in that area we couldn't, and I think people wanted that control back.
Okay. And Emily Thornberry, Labour seems to be in some doubt about whether it's even going to vote for Article 50 at the moment. Where do you stand on that? See, your business secretary said he's not going to vote for Article 50. It'll be falling apart.
Well, let's take this in stages. So first of all, the government has had to be brought to court in order to ensure that Parliament has a vote on whether or not we trigger Article 50. So we're waiting for the court decision. If the government loses it, then the government will put legislation before Parliament, and then Parliament will need to decide. I can speak personally, which is that my constituency voted overwhelmingly to remain, as did I. But my view is that I'm a national politician, I'm the Shadow Foreign Secretary, it is my duty to do as instructed by the British public. And the British public have said that we want to leave the European Union, and my job is to try to make sure that we get as good a deal as possible for Britain. And that means looking after our economy and our jobs first.
So what about your business secretary saying he won't vote for it?
I haven't spoken to him, so I don't know. I mean, I can understand why some people feel, and I do, it fits very difficultly because we have this representative democracy and many people will represent constituencies like mine we overwhelmingly voted to remain, and yet there is the result of the referendum, which is to leave. And I know that many people will genuinely find it very difficult to decide which, who are they representing? Are they representing their immediate constituencies or are they representing the nation? You'll remember there was a Tory MP who voted to leave, and he said that he didn't like the way in which the Tory party were going ahead with leaving the European Union, and so he stood down and caused a by-election. I mean, this is an issue that MPs need to wrestle with, but all I can tell you is that the Labour Party will not be getting in the way of Brexit. We will vote for Brexit to be triggered, and that is how it is going to be. But we need to make sure that we get a good deal.
You, sir, in the fourth row there.
Thank you. Interesting to hear a couple of the comments there, especially the second referendum suggestion. I don't think people were particularly unsure what we were voting for. I certainly remember the issue of the single market being brought up very clearly by a number of people, including Cameron, Osborne.
And then to pretend that we've never brought it up before.
It's all been there. So it was fairly clear. I will take one issue with Piers. You are actually incorrect. We never voted to join the EEC. We were put into the EEC without a vote.
Into the common market.
Into the common market.
But anyway, leaving that aside, do you think the outcome would be different if the thing was rerun, which is what Lynn's question was?
No, I don't think it will. I think the people are quite comfortable who've voted to leave with their decision.
All right. Lionel Shriver.
I entirely agree with you. I am fairly confident that it would end up being 52-48 again. I have yet to speak to any Brit who voted in the referendum who would have changed their mind. The population has simply entrenched. It's become very bitter, I'm afraid, but nobody's changed anybody's mind. And I think that's one reason. One of the reasons is the woman over here said, well, there was always one reason that people voted one way or the other, but they were different. I think they were all the same. I think that it had to do with a gut feeling about the EU, that it was emotional and it didn't have to do with statistics or the single market. It was a matter of whether the EU made you feel larger and more important and more connected, or it made you feel oppressed and smaller and diluted in your identity.
Okay. Let's just turn to what we had Theresa May after a lot of time people saying, what do you really want? Let's look at the speech Theresa May made on Tuesday, and whether you think... What did you think of that, the woman in the third row there? Are you confident with the way things are going?
So I think this week has been very pivotal in terms of what Theresa May has presented. I was a borderline Remainer, probably because I couldn't see a clear plan. I couldn't understand the what and the how, and so it was more of a safety net to remain and use negotiation tactics to better what was not a far from perfect European Union. But for me, this week has been very pivotal in getting some belief and confidence behind the plans that we now have. So I actually think the 52-48 would go to much more than 52 now. The decision's been made, and we need to get on with it.
Piers Morgan, do you think she made a good fist of it on Tuesday?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. And I actually agree with you. I think after Theresa May's speech, I suspect more people would feel more confident now about the direction the country's taking. One of the problems I have with the Labour Party is the completely mixed messages that we've been getting from senior members of the party. You know, I'm really not sure even now whether the Labour Party, perhaps you can clear it up, Emily, whether you believe freedom of movement, free movement of people around Europe can apply in this country and we still get some form of access to single market, because nobody on your party at the moment seems to be particularly prepared to put their head over the parapet and say either way. And these things are really important, because I'd actually dispute with Lionel. I think immigration was a massive part of this referendum.
Immigration is part of that equation.
Yeah, but I think it was the key. I think a lot of people in this country are genuinely worried about the number of people coming in here. They felt it was out of control. They felt there was social cohesion breaking up in this country, and they voted accordingly. And again, I'd say to the Labour Party, and indeed to the Conservatives, what are you going to do about this?
All right,
because we don't
Thornbury
get the answers.
Emily Thornbury, in principle, it isn't clear. In principle, is the Labour Party in favour of immigration or in favour of controlling immigration?
We're in favour of immigration, but we're in favour of fair rules, and we're in favour of managed migration, and we always have been. We're not in favour of putting arbitrary limits. We're not in favour of saying, oh, we should have this number of migrants, because that, frankly, is a load of nonsense.
But are too many people coming in from the EU to this country? That's the question.
I think it's clear to all of us that migration needs to come down, and there's a number of reasons for that, and let's have a kind of grown-up conversation about that. I mean, the reason that there are too many people coming in is because we have a skills gap in this country. We have to, whether it's plumbers, whether it's nurses, we've been getting people from Europe in order to fill those jobs because we've not been training up enough people ourselves. We've also been getting a lot of employers who are essentially taking advantage of people. We can see it. When I was last here in Peterborough, you know, there were family houses that had 10 people living in them. There was this hot bedding going on, which isn't as exciting as it sounds. But it was, you know, people who were being paid very little money, but who came over to Britain, were living on very low wages and were undercutting the
So, Chris Grayling,
markets.
do you get a clear message from Labour of their view on this?
Well, no, I don't, because what Emily is describing, I think, is a system of managed migration, which is what we need. If we need to recruit skills internationally, we should do so. But we should be able to decide what number of people we recruit, when, how and where.
So you agree with her?
But what we heard from Jeremy Corbyn, when he came to Peterborough about 2 weeks ago to make his speech, on the day before, the Labour Party was briefing that it didn't support freedom of movement. On the day, Jeremy Corbyn gave the impression he did support freedom of movement. Now, if we remain in the single market, as many Labour politicians are arguing, we have to accept unfettered free movement of people within Europe. Does the Labour Party support that or doesn't it?
Excuse me, can I just...
what Boris Johnson wanted when he said he was in favour of being part of the single market, though, Chris. And, you know, Emily cannot sit there and say that she's going to have an adult conversation and then in the next breath say that the Labour Party will not stand in the way of Brexit. It is the job of the official opposition in Parliament to scrutinise government. Yes. We know what the Conservatives want to do now. We know that they want to take us out the single market. We know that they want to take us out the custom union. We heard from Philip Hammond at the weekend that they want to make us a Singapore without the sunshine. We're going to be a low-tax, low-regulation economy.
Okay.
Now, you're just going to open the door to that.
Very brief reply, and makes someone to hear other people.
So the difficulty, so the difficulty is that Labour is not in power. I don't know if you notice that. The Conservatives are in power, and what we should be looking at...
You're not even in opposition.
What we should be looking at as the opposition is what Theresa May has said. Now, I wish her the best of luck, and I hope that she gets everything that she promises that she's going to get, that she made in that speech. She said that we were going to get free access to the single market, that we weren't going to be paying tariffs, that there wasn't going to be any red tape, that we'd be able to trade freely, that we'd be kind of somehow a bit in the customs union and a bit out of the customs union.
Well, this is what she was hoping for, not what we were going to get.
She said that these were the things that people have said this is her plan.
Yes.
And if that is her plan, she had a piece of paper, it had plan written on the top of it, you know. But the thing is that it was just a series of aspirations. There was no plan there. It is centrally contradictory.
All right,
and
fine. Thank you very much.
You didn't answer the
Thank you
question.
very much. No, all right.
Movement.
I've got a question for you, Chris Grayling. I want to hear from other members of the audience. One of the things that's been reported is that the EU wants, before they negotiate on a trade deal, us to pay £60 billion max, something like that, to the EU, before talks start. Well, is the government going to negotiate the money we owe to the EU before they sit down and have talks?
As far as I can see, there's lots of rhetoric around, lots of people saying things about what's going to happen, about what's not going to happen. We haven't even triggered Article 50 yet, so I suggest we wait and see what actually happens when we get into the negotiations.
Well, you've read what the EU leaders have said. Before we start talks with you, you've got to stump up the money you owe to the club.
Well, shall we wait and see what actually happens when we've triggered Article 50? I say a lot of things are being said by a lot of people in Brussels and elsewhere. What actually matters is what happens across the negotiating table after we triggered Article 50.
You think they may not mean it?
Well, I think a lot of things will be said now by a lot of people.
You've said that already.
Let's cross that bridge when it actually happens.
Is there going to be a bill to pay to the EU before we start negotiating our leaving it?
Well, I'm not expecting, and Theresa May was very clear this week in saying that we weren't going to be carrying on contributing to the European Union. But let's leave the discussions until the point when they actually start and when we've triggered Article 50.
Doesn't this just show the foolishness of the threatening tone that Theresa May struck on Tuesday? It is the worst possible way to get into a negotiation.
No.
If you,
Let me challenge you on that. Let me challenge you on that.
If you want to start a decent negotiation, then you should be going about it showing that we're going to have a negotiation between departing friends,
but hang on.
not a threatening tone.
Hang on, we tried this. No, I don't agree with this. The reason I don't think that's right is we saw what David Cameron did. So he went over there, and it's a bit... I was in Marrakesh in Morocco at New Year on holiday.
And
you go... No, hang on, let me finish.
You
go into the souks, the market. You've ever been there. It's fantastic. They're 1,500 years old. And you start trading. You start bartering. David Cameron's the kind of guy that goes in the first shop and says, I love all your carpets. And by the way, I'm not leaving here until you've screwed me over.
Okay.
And that's what he did. Now, wait, let me finish. Theresa May looked at this and went, well, that doesn't work, does it? So she said to the first guy, well, I quite like your carpets, but I've got a really great offer on carpets from this guy called Donald in America. And if you don't do me a great deal, I'm just going to walk out of your shop and I'm going to go to Donald and do a deal with his carpets. I think that is a great negotiating tactic.
The woman in the third... I want to hear from members of our audience now. The woman in the third row in spectacles there from the back. Yes, that's you, pointing to yourself.
There seems to be lots of talk about kind of plans and aspirations and negotiations, and the truth of the matter is, until we are 2 years after triggering Article 50, we don't know the kind of country that we're going to end up being at the end of this process. There's talk about low tax, haven for business. There's a potential that by the time we get to that process, we could be damaging our union with Scotland. There's potential that we are undermining some progress that's been made in the peace process between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
So you're a bit uneasy about the 2 years, are you?
And so my request is not that we have a second referendum, but it's about the fact that the government comes back to consult us again, because any of those types of changes to our country are fundamental and they deserve a referendum in their own right.
So do you want, you want a referendum after the deal has been done, do you?
It's called an
so
to the end
to
know what our options really are, because everybody can say, I knew what I was voting for one way or the other, but whatever I ticked last year, I wasn't voting for a low tax haven country. I wasn't voting for Scotland to leave the Union.
All right, but what would you want? An election, a referendum? What would satisfy you in terms of the democratic responsibility you feel you have?
I'd love a referendum, and I think as a Remainer myself, that would help me. If we did then leave, I would feel, OK, I can go along with this process. We've had 2 years of intense debate, and I can buy into this now.
Thank you. The man up there in blue, and then I'll come to you over there. Yes, sir.
We ought to adopt the Scottish way of doing a referendum. Keep going until Nicola Sturgeon gets her own way.
OK, and you, sir, over there. Yes. Yes, the man pointing to his head.
OK.
Yeah.
Well, I was the Vote Leave coordinator for Peterborough, and I never thought I'd say this, but I completely agree with Piers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
With regards to immigration, to say that that wasn't one of the main contributing issues that people are concerned about is ridiculous. And the fact that Labour, Lib Dems, are calling for second referendums or ignoring the fact of immigration, mainly because they're worried about losing left-wing supporters, is just absolutely ridiculous and needs addressing. They are democracy deniers, to be honest.
OK. I want to go on to one other question, still on the Brexit issue, from Elizabeth Damaser, please, just before we leave this. Elizabeth.
Is Boris Johnson a liability, or is he brave enough to say what the rest of us are thinking?
Emily Thornberry.
I think it's very unfortunate that the Foreign Office is led by Boris Johnson. I think that we should have somebody who is a diplomat, and if we need to be doing negotiations with friends and allies, we should be doing it in a way which is diplomatic and not contrary to our interests. I think that the whole Brexit negotiations will be complicated. I think that Theresa May put forward a whole lot of promises, you know, before the public, but actually it will be a compromise. I don't think it's like buying a carpet. I think it's a bit more like a divorce. I think that you have to keep your head, and I think you have to continue to talk to one another, and you have to be prepared to do a trade-off. And I think that if Theresa May is going to go to Europe and is going to speak on behalf of the whole of the British public, she should be prepared to have a proper debate. I look back to what happened.
We're talking about Boris Johnson, not about...
Yeah, and
I thought we were.
Yeah, we were talking about Boris Johnson.
I thought Elizabeth Damaser wanted to know what you thought.
I now want to talk about David Cameron.
No,
and
no,
when David Cameron came back
Boris Johnson.
with his...
Boris Johnson.
Before... The idea...
He's dead and buried, David Cameron. He's gone.
The idea
I don't know whether
that
you
we
noticed,
have not had a plan at all until now.
All right.
And David Cameron specifically
All right,
told the
OK,
civil
if you're going to
service
talk about David
not
Cameron,
to
I'll
look
cut you off
for a
because we've
plan.
got to keep moving. Lionel Shriver. Boris Johnson.
I find him rather charming. I confess. I'm not sure he's in the right job. Partly because these EU people don't have a sense of humor.
You think he should be Prime Minister?
I'd send him over to the US. He's one of the only British politicians that Americans recognize.
As ambassador? Or just send him?
Unlike some Americans, I'm not going to tell the British who to appoint as ambassador.
Piers Morgan.
I love Boris. I think Boris is a character. I think he's very bright, much brighter than sometimes he possibly suggests with what he says. But he made a joke. He made a joke which was actually a very smart analogy about the kind of veiled threats that were coming out of the European Union about how they were going to punish us. And it was immediately, as all jokes are in this PC-crazed world that we now have to endure, it immediately became a sickening Nazi taunt at Europe, which, of course, the Europeans couldn't believe their luck. This is fantastic.
Also,
we can now take the high moral ground about Nazis.
Piers, it was fraudulent. It was fake offendedness.
Of course it was.
All right? It was a performance of being hurt.
Exactly. Nobody actually was wounded by this joke. Here's what I think about Boris and what I thought about Theresa May this week as well. What they did was a bit of much-needed chest beating for this country, much-needed belief in Britain, again, as a country that matters in the world. And by contrast, I'm sorry, Emily, you said next to me, it feels a little bit ungentlemanly, but I'm going to read you what you said this week. You warned that Britain was now such a small player, it could be swallowed up in trade talks. Now, that kind of defeatist talk, I'm sorry, well, let me finish.
Oh, right.
That kind of defeatist talk doesn't do us any favours at all.
Boris
Johnson...
You're not going to go into that. No. We're on Boris Johnson. It's not all about you, Emily.
He keeps having a go at me.
I know he had a go at you, but he has a go at everybody.
He deserved it.
The woman up there on the right, and then I come to you. Yes, you.
I think Boris Johnson is a great chap, and he can take this country forward. He says what a lot of us are thinking, and he's got the... Can I say the word?
What is it?
To do it, and I think he could do this country proud. And let's put the great back into Great Britain.
OK. And you, yeah. Yes.
just reflecting on some of the things people have been saying, I think a lot of it's about personal integrity. Some people on the panel have said, I voted one way, but now because my constituency this, I represent my constituents, so now I've given up my beliefs. Now I'm going along with this. It sounds like a
So it was her job to represent her
thing.
constituents, is
yes,
what she
but
said.
is it? Or do we elect people of personal integrity? A lot of people say positive things about Boris. He's someone whose personal integrity, we believe he's genuine.
Really?
And to have people who are genuine and who are bright, as you say, there was a thing against experts, wasn't there? Or a thing against being bright and working things out. And there's a whole piece there, surely, about the personal integrity of those who represent us. And otherwise you go down a mob rule route where it's a majority.
Alistair Carmichael, does Boris have personal integrity?
Well, I mean, I think there may have been an element of synthetic outrage meeting his remarks. Yeah. But, you know, it would be fine, it would be explicable if this was a one-off, if this was the first time it had ever happened. But it seems there's hardly a month goes by, but he's generating headlines of some sort for this. And actually, the thing that really worried me about this was the lack of outrage that there was genuinely coming from the continent, because I think they've stopped being outraged by Boris. I think they just laugh at him now.
Okay.
And at a time when what we really need is a good team pursuing Britain's best interests, he's a distraction.
All right, Chris Grayling.
Well, anybody hopes that Boris is going to turn into the grey man spouting official speak is going to be sadly disappointed. The reality is Boris is a great character. He's a very popular figure. But you have to remember something else about Boris. He's actually a very smart guy. He speaks multiple languages. He's very well versed in international affairs. And I suspect that the overriding sense of foreign ministers in other countries who've dealt with him over the last few months is discovering what a sophisticated knowledge he actually has about the affairs of the world, about the issues that they mutually face. And I think he's proving a very good foreign secretary.
Okay.
And certainly, I'll deal with him around the table, and he is.
And Emily Thornberry, I cut you off after you're under attack from everybody on the... Would you want to have just a brief last word about...
Can I just say that you can take quotes out of context, Piers, and you can twist them, but the truth is...
What did I misquote?
No, Piers, let her have her say.
Well, hang on, what did I misquote?
Well, hang on, well, let her explain.
You just accused me of misquoting it.
Well, that's not the worst thing in the world, Piers.
Abrogation of my journalistic integrity, David.
All right. Well, you can be pompous if you want, but Emily, it's your...
Thank you. So we were negotiating as part of the European Union with the Americans, and we were getting a deal called TTIP. And there were a lot of concerns about it, particularly about the effect that it might have on privatisation of the National Health Service. And a lot of people were against it. And then Donald Trump says that he's going to have a trade deal with us within weeks. First of all, trade deals don't take weeks. And if we're going to get bounced into a trade deal with the United States, we have to be very careful to make sure that we don't get ourselves bounced into a deal that will not do us any good. If we were having a deal with the United States as part of Europe that wasn't necessarily to our advantage,
where were you
we need to
misquoted
be
all
very
this? I'm
careful.
lost
where was the
now.
misquote?
I put it within that context.
What did you say?
Did you say we were such a small player we might get swallowed up in trade
I said we have to be careful.
Did you say
Given that we are now,
Did you say
compared
that?
to the European Union, a small player, we have to be very careful not to get swallowed
Right, but
up
just to clarify,
by such a large
Emily,
economy as
Emily,
the
just to clarify, you did say what I said you said.
Get over your ego and listen to what it is
about
I'm
ego.
saying.
It's not about
Get
ego.
over what it is I'm saying, and I'm making an important point, which is when we
it's a really important
negotiate
point.
as Britain, as opposed to the European Union, we will be doing this with trade deals around the world. We need to be conscious of that, and we need to make sure that because once a trade deal has been signed, private companies will be going to our British courts and saying there is a trade deal. We demand access to your markets on these terms because this is what has been agreed. We need to be careful.
Thank you very much.
And many of these things cannot simply be answered in half a sentence misquote.
Thank you. I'll take, that's it. Let's leave that, and I'll take a point from the woman there in the third row from the back, please, and then we'll go on.
Well, I was the person that asked the question
Yes,
about Boris, and
indeed.
I don't quite understand what Emily's been saying because it didn't seem to have any relevance to my question.
What's your view?
I think my view...
Your question was whether he was just saying what the rest of us are thinking.
Exactly,
He's brave.
and I think he's a very intelligent man.
Yes.
My concern is that in the position of Foreign Secretary, should he be making the sort of inflammatory remark that perhaps
And
was?
your answer to that is what?
I'm inclined to support him anyway.
Oh, I see. So you want him to stay. Right, thank you very much. Clear as mud, your position, but thank you very much. We're going to be in London next week with Question Time. We're going to be in Wallasey the week after that. Just say those two places, London, then Wallasey. On the screen is how to get to us. I'll give those details at the end. But let's go on to another question to do with tomorrow from Kasim Jaffa, please. Kasim Jaffa.
Will the world be a more dangerous place from tomorrow when Donald Trump is sworn in as the 45th president?
Will the world be a more dangerous place from tomorrow when Trump becomes the 45th president? Lionel Shriver.
It will certainly be more interesting.
And?
Yeah, probably. I am less worried about what Trump does domestically because that can often be redressed in another administration. But I am most worried about his foreign policy. I think he's poorly educated about the world, and he's not calculated enough. People are always making so much of his business experience, and he's a great negotiator, but I don't see that so far in what he's said in relation to other countries, that kind of calculation. I mean, the one China policy is a good example. You know, it is a dumb policy. Taiwan is a separate country. It's a democracy. Don't tell the Chinese. And China doesn't control it, and the U.S. Supports it with a lot of arms. That's the reality. But the U.S. goes along with the Chinese delusion that it's still part of China. Well, you know what? Going along with that delusion doesn't cost us anything. So, okay, it's a little annoying to have to defy reality like that and to pander to someone's vanity. But if you're going to stand up and say, I don't know, we're going to call your bluff, there actually are two Chinas, you have to get something out of it. And the only thing that the United States would get out of it was trouble. So you keep your mouth shut and you go along with it. And that's the kind of calculation that a president needs to make. And I'm worried he's not capable of it.
All right.
And stuff with China, this is not funny. I mean, you don't want to offend their pride. It's pointless.
Sorry, what? But
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. I wanted to put you at a slightly different point, which was you read the Michael Gove interview with Donald Trump, in which he said NATO was obsolete, and he'd certainly look at getting rid of the alliance. Can we come to the NATO point? China as well, if you want. But is it a more dangerous place?
Well, my immediate reaction to what Lionel said is actually one of the reasons Trump's got elected is precisely because he will stand up to China and he will say, I don't agree with you. And he's going to reinforce American power, which is why a lot of Americans like him and voted for him. In relation to NATO, he said that the structure of NATO is obsolete. Well, why did Donald Trump say that? Well, because as President of the United States, as from tomorrow, he looked at the maths. 72% of all the spending of NATO is consumed by the Americans. Right? Of the other 27 members of NATO, only 4 countries pay their 2% of GDP towards NATO. 4. We're one of them. But that means that 23 other countries do not pay what they should pay. And Donald Trump's a business guy. And he's looked back and gone, hang on, why are we doing all the work? Why are we paying all the money? Where's the contribution from all these people who, the moment they have any trouble, they come to the Americans and ask us to help? So he's looking at it as an obsolete structure that needs to be dragged kicking and screaming into a better deal for America.
And Kasim's question about whether it's more dangerous, a more dangerous place than
I don't think so. Again, I would come back to what is Trump at his heart. You know, I've known him a long time, 10 years, and I keep being told I have to call him a monster every 5 minutes because that's what the lemmings of the world have all agreed. He's a monster. He's not a monster. He's not an angel. He's not a monster. He's a very smart business guy who has consistently proven people wrong, both at the early stage of his campaign. Then he won the nomination when no one said he could. Then he beat Hillary Clinton. I think we underestimate him at our peril. I think he will not look at warfare as a good deal. I think he will look upon it as a massive drain on America's resources. And Trump knows that all he has to do to go down as a great, successful president and very popular if he pulls it off is get American jobs back to Americans, from outside America, from the outsourcing that has wrecked the Rust Belt states of America. He's got to keep America safe. He's got to tighten up immigration and deliver on the things that were the core messages that propelled him to the White House. If he can do that, and I don't think he's going to be declaring war in the way that Hillary Clinton might have done, because she was one of the great hawks of modern times in America. So I say to people about Trump this: give him a chance. You know, you don't have to like him. You can be offended by some of the things he says. He shoots from a hip, he says what he's thinking. Sometimes he goes over the top. But give the guy a chance and judge him on his actions, and you might be pleasantly surprised.
Thank you.
I mean, I hear what Piers says, and I hope that he's right. I hope that what Donald Trump has said isn't necessarily who the person that he is. I think that if it's right that he doesn't mean that he's going to trample all over the Paris Climate Change Agreement, then I'm pleased. If he's not going to move the American embassy to Jerusalem and wreck the two-state solution, then I will be very happy. If he's not going to try and undermine the Iranian nuclear deal, then again, I will be very encouraged, and I will judge him by his actions.
You have no instinct at the moment.
The difficulty is, if you look at the people that he's appointed, that kind of seems to underline the sort of things that he has been saying. And not to, again, to criticise Piers, because that wouldn't be my job, but you know, when he talks about his journalistic integrity, Donald Trump did not say that NATO had an obsolete structure. He said it was obsolete.
No.
Now, our defence is based on NATO and our agreement and our agreements with America and the other states of Europe. And we need to have NATO, and we need to have an American
seriously
president
think he's thinking he might break it up?
Donald Trump wants to continue with NATO. He just does not want America to continue paying an irrationally high amount of money to support everybody else.
And what we have to do, I think, as Britain, we are Americans' closest and longest-standing friend. We are actually in a position of some power and some authority and influence. And I think that we need to have a Prime Minister who is prepared to say, when it is necessary, no, Mr. President, that's wrong.
Yeah, but also, Emily, what about this? Donald Trump is half British. You know, I've talked to him many times about his British roots. His mum was born and raised in Scotland till she was 18. He loves this country. His mother loved the Queen, absolutely loved the Queen. If I'm Britain right now, coming out of the European Union, and our biggest exporters, the biggest purchaser of our exports in the world after the EU is America. And we've got Donald Trump saying, I'm half British, I'm the most powerful man in the world, I want a deal. We should be tearing the roof down
and we
to
should
get
never,
it.
Okay, enough from the side table. All right, thank you. No, all right. Listen, the two of you, you've done well. You've made big contributions. You've taken up too much time compared with the three people here and the people in the audience. You, sir, in the second row.
What do your Muslim friends think of your staunch defence of
Trump? No, we don't want Piers anymore for the moment. We can have him again.
Leave it hanging like that. Yes. I wrote a column attacking him.
I've seen your columns. They're not attacks, Piers. You know, when you butter him up by please just be a little nicer, it's not an attack. It's just a nice little love letter to say you've been a little naughty.
Well, actually, I didn't. No, I didn't. I said the Muslim ban was an outrage, and he had to withdraw it. And guess what? Trump has withdrawn that, and has now said he wants to have tighter controls on people coming from terror countries. So I did.
Where I agree with Piers, you have to judge people by what they do in office. You know, the United States is our closest ally. It's our most important ally. It is a country with which we have long-standing ties and should continue to do so. And we will work with the Trump administration. Theresa May will go shortly to meet Donald Trump. There are already interchanges taking place between our government and the incoming administration. And if you look at the Trump appointments, there's a very broad-ranging cabinet of people who've got a range of different experience, some past cabinet ministers reappointed. So I think we should be optimistic. I think we should engage with the new administration. I don't think the world is a more dangerous place because of Donald Trump becoming President of the United States. The world is a dangerous place anyway. And the trouble is not going to come from a new administration in the United States. It comes from some of the appalling things we're seeing in the Middle East with ISIL, for example. We need to work closely with the United States to combat those threats. Right. That's where the real dangers come from.
Point made. Thank you. Alistair Carmichael.
I think I can agree with Piers to this extent, and it is that Donald Trump tomorrow is inaugurated into an office that is just too important for us and our people not to give him the benefit of the doubt. So we do have to give him the opportunity to show how he governs regardless of how he campaigned. But he might not be a monster, but Piers, this is a man who thinks it's OK to mock disabled people. He thinks it's OK to marginalise ethnic minorities. He thinks it is OK to talk about women in a way that, frankly, should never have been allowed to happen at any age, let alone
we've been through that a lot during the campaign.
He denies climate change. Now, the question is really, what does it mean for this country? Now, one of the things that worries me at the moment...
For the world, is it a more dangerous place?
Well, I think it's a more worrying place, at least. And from our point of view, the thing that concerns me is I think the government's nose is out of joint because they see that Nigel Farage has been in there. They've got some catching up to do. Donald Trump has said that he is going to reinstate the American torture programme.
Yep.
Now, we in this country have historically shared intelligence with America. We do not share intelligence with countries that use torture.
I think his Attorney General said he wouldn't allow that to happen. I think in the hearings they've made it clear that wouldn't happen.
You have to hope so, because just
you can't
this
have to hope so. It's on the record. The people who've appointed us say they're not going to do it.
In the Supreme Court, we had a judgment from the Belhaj case where, in fact, MI5 agents, in this case, were complicit with American rendition of dissidents to Libya. That is the sort of thing that can happen when the special relationship goes wrong.
Have you been listening to the hearings?
That is why Mrs. May...
Have you listened to the hearings?
I haven't been listening. I saw one of the women who's being appointed as the Education Secretary. That's the only one.
Well, if you listen to the hearings on the Attorney General, you hear these points actually addressed.
But
we may not believe what they say, but that's not
look, we've been here before, David. That's the point.
All right. The woman here.
Well, I just heard Piers describe Donald Trump as a smart businessman.
Well, let's hear your view, not what Piers said.
Well, we have seen in this country a smart businessman who is now out on his yacht, leaving the BHS workers without a job or a pension. So sometimes smart businessmen can leave a trail of destruction.
OK. Yeah. And there, now, who have went up? It's you, sir, with the fair, with the white hair and the spectacles. Yes.
It's a bit like the referendum. The Americans have voted for Trump. He should be given his chance, and he just might surprise people. I think he's good for the country.
All right, I'm going to move on because we will have plenty of time to talk about Trump as the presidency unfolds. But let's go on to a question from Samantha Hemraj, please. Samantha Hemraj.
Should the council be allowed to raise council tax by 15% for social care? Shouldn't this be coming out of central government budgets?
It's a fascinating story. It happened today, which is that Surrey County Council's leader, and Chris Grayling's constituency is in Surrey, said he wanted to raise council tax by 15%, for which he has to have a referendum. And so he's proposing a referendum because he can't afford to pay for social care. Chris Grayling, you in favour of this?
Well, he should certainly be able to ask the question.
You want people to vote yes or no?
But it's for the people of Surrey to decide whether or not he should do it.
How would you advise them?
Now, the question about where the responsibility should lie in terms of payment, I think the solution to the challenge we face between health and social care is much greater integration between the two. It's happening in a number of places in the country. It does make a difference. Actually, on a micro level, it's happening in my constituency.
But he says he's got no money. He says they've run out of money and they can't do it unless they raise 15%.
So I think the solution in a place like Surrey is actually that local integration, and actually, therefore, it is local control of budgets. I think if you centralise everything, you don't get that integration that you need that creates both savings and a better service when the two work together.
But you've cut
as to whether Surrey's doing the right thing or not, David is going to have to get up and defend what he's doing. He's going to have to make the case that he needs to do this rather than bring efficiencies elsewhere. And the people of Surrey are going to have to decide.
But what's he meant to do when you've cut 170 million off his budget?
Well, it's a challenging time for local authorities. It's a challenging time for central government. The reality is, across the public sector, in order to make the nation's books balance and in order to deliver good services still, and in order to make sure we don't put up your taxes, we've had to take some tough and challenging decisions. That's the same at national government, it's the same at local government. Right. And David's challenge, as leader of Surrey County Council, is to go out and explain why it's necessary to do this and let the people of Surrey decide.
Emily Thornbury, this is the first council, I think, to go to a referendum to put up its tax take, because it says central government's not funding it properly. Yeah. Do you think they're right, or do you think, as Samantha says, perhaps it should be coming out of the central government in the first place?
I think this is a national problem, and I think the government is totally in denial about this at the moment. I was in the chamber of the House of Commons, and I heard Theresa May say that the problems with the NHS are, quote, a small number of incidents where unacceptable practices have taken place. I think she needs to get out more. I think she needs to actually see what's going on. The difficulty is that the crisis in social care is what the social care and the NHS, you're right to this extent, are absolutely go hand in hand together. If you don't look after elderly people in their homes, if they're not actually, nobody comes around to see them until lunchtime to get them up, or there's nobody there if they fall over, then they're going to end up in A&E, which means they're going to end up in hospital, and then they won't be able to get out again because there won't be the help in the community in order to ensure that they can get out again. And of course, this is one of the reasons, there are others, as to why it is we're having the crisis in the NHS. And for local authorities to have all this money cut away from them, and then for the government to say, oh, it's all right, it's all your fault, it's all your responsibility, you can raise council tax and make it up. You can't. The amount of money that has been taken out of social care cannot be made up by raising council tax locally, but actually this is a national issue, it is a national crisis, and it's about time the government woke up to it.
And what would you do? Where would you find the money? Where would you find the money?
What I would do is I would not ever have as my priority, when every budget comes forward, to keep cutting corporation tax for a start. You know, and I do not believe that we are a country that cannot afford to have sufficient resources in our A&Es, so that we have a child you're sleeping on 2 chairs whilst waiting 4 hours to be seen at A&E. I don't believe that we're a country that actually is about that sort of thing.
You say corporation tax,
yeah.
but that's a very small proportion of tax, isn't it?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? I mean, if we leave the European Union in the way that Theresa May is saying that we might have to, she's going to cut corporation tax for, I think it's £120 billion over 5 years.
What would you have it put up by? How much would you put it up?
I would look again at how it is that we can make sure that social care works with health. And yes, it has to be that the two are to be integrated. And yes, there can be savings made. But I would make sure that we introduced again. I mean, do you remember NHS Direct? We used to be able to ring up an expert who we could speak to, who would be able to give us proper advice. I've rung up the Alternative since then, and they keep telling me to go to A&E. And when I get to A&E, I say, look, I'm really sorry, but, you know, I rang up this number and I was told to get to A&E immediately. You know, and of course our A&Es are full as a result.
You should go to your GP.
And that would be good, wouldn't it? But look how difficult it is for people to get appointments at their GPs. That's why they go to A&E as well.
The man in spectacles there with the grey and a grey shirt. You, sir. Yeah.
Why are we so averse all the time to not raise income tax when our infrastructure is streaming out for money?
Alistair Carmichael.
Well, you think it's bad now? Wait till Philip Hammond gets his way and we are a low-tax, low-regulation, small government country out of the single market. But it seems churlish now to remind us that we were going to get £350 million a week for the NHS. That doesn't seem to be coming any time soon.
Well, that's because we haven't left the European Union.
Hold on. So is it going to come?
Well, the government
Hold on, you just said it's because we haven't left yet. Is it going to happen?
The government will take decisions about public spending, what to do with the money that we save when we have left the European Union.
But hang on, you're teasing us. You're teasing us. Yes. You sat here before the referendum and said it'd be 350 million into the NHS. Now you're saying what?
What I said at the time is that the government would be able to take decisions about its priorities when we've left
the
European Union.
Well, that's a fat lot of good telling us that. What does that mean?
But that's what I said at your programme, isn't it?
If backpedalling ever becomes an Olympic sport, you've just seen a gold medal performance there.
OK.
The gentleman's right. We need a serious conversation about this. I actually think I'd like to get all the parties together into an independent commission, try and take some of the political heat out of this, because, frankly, every year, it's another crisis. GPs this year, A&Es next. It's going to be mental health the year after that. All we do is we shift money around to patch it up. We need to have a sustainable long-term solution.
Lionel Shriver.
I think we do need to address this issue of corporation tax, because there seems to be some economic confusion. I know that it seems sensible that if you take more money, then you get more money. But with corporation tax, that's not really the way it works. Ireland experimented with lowering the corporation tax to 12%. They made money. That's the way you make money. You bring in inward investment. there are more employees, they pay more income tax. That's the way you get money.
Piers Morgan.
In 1948, when the NHS was launched by Labour, I'm going to agree with quite a lot of what you just said, Emily. You're going to be pleased to hear.
Good, it's nice to hear.
We had a population of 50 million people. The average life expectancy was 66 for men, 71 for women. Today, 63 million population, up by 13 million. Men are living to 77, 11 years longer on average. Women to 81, 10 years longer. There's the problem. We are living a lot longer. Well, it's a problem if you can't cope with it. It's a problem if you can't cope with it. The system cannot cope with the extra volume of people coming in. The social care system, which is supposed to mean that people can go in and then be taken care of, is collapsing. The funding for it is being withdrawn. We now have a Tory-led council taking on its own government, where its own ministers live, and having to humiliate them. We've got front-page pictures of grandmothers on trolleys for 24, 36 hours, of 4-year-old kids lying on the floor in our hospitals, and a Prime Minister saying, crisis? What crisis?
So
it's not good enough. Well, I think what you're going to do...
What's the solution?
Well, the other part of the equation is we also have to be accountable. Yes, we can beat up all the politicians, but we also have to be accountable. I've been in A&E on a Friday night. It's like the Wild West in there, right? We are putting so much extra pressure on these hospitals with a lot of meaningless, irrelevant little injuries that don't need that treatment. So we have to look at that. I personally would have GP surgeries in every A&E, and I get the government to pay for it. Secondly, this is a national issue, not a council one. It should be dealt with by the government. They've got to put more money in. But thirdly, we have to contribute too, either through taxation or through national insurance. But the National Health Service, go and live in America for a bit like I have, and you'll see how brilliant our National Health Service actually is. And we need to support it, and we need to help it.
All right. Now, look, a lot of people with their hands up, and I will come to you, but I want to add in this element, a question from Dusan Obradovich, please. Dusan.
Why are we giving away so much money to foreign aid while we're cutting back on vital services at home?
We're giving 0.7% of our GDP, which is £12 billion. Chris Grayling, briefly on that point, if you would, and then I want to hear from other members of the audience about what you say, Dusan.
We've heard tonight about immigration. We've seen the refugee crisis in Europe over the last 12, 18 months. If we want to create a world where thousands of people don't cross borders to try and come to Europe, we actually have to help those countries develop. Now, one of the great success stories of our time, understated often, is that we're seeing poverty, literacy levels rise, poverty fall in the developing world. The developing world is an improving place, but the money we spend is all about helping that process continue and easing those pressures of people coming across borders to get here.
Yeah. Dusan?
I agree with Chris, like, what he's saying there. You know, at the end of the day, like, the money what we give out is all coming out. It's coming out of some kind of taxpayers' money, I'm sure it is. Or the people are contributing towards it.
Of course it is. And
at the end of the day, like, I understand, but when over the years I've seen as a young guy who's been brought up in this country and born here, and see places being shut for special needs people and kids. The youth today ain't got their vital services. The old people as well have been like cut back, and at the end of the day, it's all gone kind of pear-shaped.
And you think we should cut back on what we do overseas?
I'm not really gone into the statistics side, but on what I gather, I think we've given away £50 billion in 5 years in foreign aid. And at the end of the day, we talk about the national wealth, we talk about, you know, the old people. At the same time, you guys are the ones who make these decisions, OK?
All right, let me come to the woman here in the front. Yes, yes, we hear from you.
Thank you. I'm a recently retired social worker who worked with older people in my last job. I was retired on ill health grounds after years and years and years of excessive stress. And I can tell you that the government's cuts to social care are not funny.
But what's your remedy for it? Did you believe the council should raise the money?
No, I don't.
You believe we should cut foreign aid?
No, I absolutely don't think we should cut foreign aid. For starters, I think there is money there, but I think the government makes choices about what they do with it. They make choices about whether they change the top rate of tax, for example. We have very wealthy, but we're a very, very wealthy country. And to suggest that we can't look after our older people, to suggest...
Over the years.
Yes.
He's saying we've got... we can't hear what you're saying. Hold on. Just say it again, because we missed you. Say it again.
Over these years, like, I've seen food banks. I've never seen that before in my life.
Yes.
And now and you're saying we're giving away all our money, okay, but why have we got food banks?
We haven't given away all our money. The government makes choices.
Why don't you have a separate tax system for you people, and you pay for all of this, and people like us who don't want to contribute, don't contribute?
I may be retired, but I still pay my taxes, I can assure you.
We're all the same people.
We are.
Right,
But we have homelessness.
Okay,
Let me just finish, please. We have homelessness in this country, the like of which we've never seen in our lifetimes before. You know, we have old people that can't get out of hospital, and that's one of the problems we have with our NHS. And I'm sick to death of listening to the Tory party saying, oh, well, we're doing this and we're giving them extra money and we're giving... They're not.
OK, Chris Grayling, do you want to answer that briefly? I'll take you up there.
All I can say is the healthcare budget is rising year after year after year, and the challenge we've got in an ageing with an ageing population, new treatments almost every week, keeping up is a real challenge.
Okay.
You cut 40%.
Hold on, no, you've had your say. You up there.
From our
Sorry,
older social care budget.
we're coming towards the end. I've got to go to some other people. You
The debate completely shaped wrong. We're here saying, oh, we have to cut here, cut there to get the deficit down, and we're not asking those at the top to pay more.
Well, all right, hold on.
We don't sit there saying, oh, how are we going to afford these tax cuts or afford these tax cuts, but we sit there saying, oh, how are we going to afford paying to just keep people fed and housed?
Well, I think the really important point on this is that the amount of tax paid by the wealthiest in our society has risen and risen in the last few years. And the most recent figures on inequality, published 2 weeks ago, show that inequality in this country, the gap between the richest and the poorest, is at its lowest level since the 1980s. You may not believe it, but that's the statistical reality.
Emily Thornbury, do you hear often the argument that we should cut foreign aid in order to pay for domestic, what you might call domestic aid, the National Health Service, welfare?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that a couple of the Daily Mail has been running a campaign about this for some time. I think that we pay 0.7% of our income as a country to develop the developing world because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Because it's the right thing to do. And because we are an interconnected world. We are an island, but we're not an island.
Right.
We're an international...
But Emily, it's also about choices.
Yes.
Some of the stories that I think...
it's about doing the right thing.
Yeah, but I agree. But some of the stories that anger people about foreign aid, I've been following the Mail's campaign on this. You know, there was one story about an Ethiopian all-girl pop band who were being backed by £5 million of UK taxpayer money. Now, that is the kind of figure for that kind of project where people look at grannies on trolleys in our hospitals for 2 days and they go, this isn't right.
No.
And so that is where I think we have to look at it
and say,
you have 30
what is our priority?
Alistair. So you cut it from 0.7 to 0.6 or 0.5. Believe me, there will still be food banks, there will still be people in their trolleys. The reason that we pay that, it's an international obligation and it goes to help people in other parts of the world who, frankly, would love to have the problems that we are complaining about today. I don't diminish any of them, but frankly, you've got to put this in some sort of global context.
And I would love to have the time to bring more of you in, but our hour is up, I'm afraid, so I can't. I'm sorry. Apologies to those of you who've been trying to get in on the debate.
I've been